Mark Grayson, son of Omni-Man and currently Earth's strongest defender. Despite his superhero persona, Mark is a character whose strength very often lies in mystery for fans of his show. While his Viltrumite heritage gives him the potential to be one of the strongest characters in the entire universe, sometimes it doesn't really feel that way. So in this video, we'll be seeing how strong Mark truly is by pitting him up against a verse that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, the very cruel world of Jujutsu Kaisen. By placing him up against the world of sorcerers and curses, we'll be able to determine whether or not Mark truly deserves the title of To kick this video off, we'll be going over Mark's base stats, namely being his strength, speed, and durability. Usually in a breakdown like this, I would go over both opponents or set of opponents' special abilities or hacks. However, in this specific case, Mark doesn't really have any unique attributes outside of being able to fly and hold his breath for extended periods of times that would be uniquely important or impressive in this specific context. He does have a pretty impressive healing factor in a larger context, but considering the fact that it takes him days to recover from near fatal injuries, it doesn't really matter in a versus battle like this one. Starting with his physical strength feats, we see that Mark, even in the beginning of the series, is able to catch massive asteroids in orbit, capable of doing large amounts of damage to the planet if it collided. And when calculating exactly how much strength is required to do such a thing, a consistent mountain level of power is gleaned. This is relatively consistent with some of his early resilience feats and ability to somewhat stagger his father with punches for a small time. He's able to pull something like this off when he's at his weakest and least developed, and in the following seasons we see that his proficiency with his Viltrumite power grows and his training improves. This manifests itself with him being able to go toe-to-toe with a competent Viltrumite warrior like Thula, who is part of a team sent to either kill or capture Nolan. Now I say toe-to-toe, but while Mark was able to somewhat combat this Viltrumite warrior, it's still clear that he can't just walk up to Nolan and go blow for blow with his pops just yet. However, in times of extreme stress or rage, he can achieve levels of power that start to brush up upon that domain and vastly surpass what I would consider Mark's base level of strength. This alone would take Mark's strength from mountain level to small country under the right circumstances, and we can confidently determine this based on Nolan being able to stop a meteor from colliding with Earth that was, in his own words, the size of Texas, which itself is bigger than many small countries. Like I said before, this level of power isn't something that I think he can casually tap into as of season 2, but this ability does lie dormant within him, usually walled off behind rage or adrenaline. And if you combine that fact with his 138% gain in strength in the 3rd season, you have a superhero that can pack quite a punch when he wants to. Now, in regards to his speed, Mark is actually even more impressive in my humble opinion, showing on numerous occasions that he's able to fly, think, and react at speeds approaching or outright reaching that of light. Since this is fiction and many common laws of science are being broken here anyway, there isn't truly a need to explain why Mark and other Viltrumites are able to achieve this impossible speed, but we actually do get an attempt at explaining how they're able to do this, as apparently Viltrumites subconsciously and almost instantaneously shift their mass distribution of subatomic particles in their body to ignore the laws of inertia. Now, does this make sense? I don't know, man. I'm not a physicist. I'm gonna be real with you. I'm just a guy making versus battle videos in his bedroom. It sounded vaguely sciencey, so I included it. It kind of explains why Mark is able to move that fast. Do with this information what you will. In any case, we get glimpses of this relativistic to light speed movement when seeing Mark travel from the moon to the Earth in the span of a few seconds. Based on what we see up to season 3 of Invincible, Mark doesn't move quite as quickly when he's on Earth, likely in part due to the air resistance provided by the atmosphere of the planet, but we've seen examples of him traveling like thousands of times faster than sound, even when under the constraints of Earth's atmosphere. In combat, Mark can use the aforementioned levels of speed, but he tends to do so in a pretty straightforward and, to be honest, basic way of doing so by just bum rushing in with his flight and trying to blitz his opponents that way. In part because he holds back, but also because of his amateurish brawling fighting style. You don't see Mark barrage opponents with a flurry of strikes the way you tend to see really fast anime characters do. He'll charge at you and body slam you, then throw really telegraphed punches until you go down, or he goes down. Now, he can fight other Viltrumites and not get absolutely speed blitzed, which does mean he's able to apply this speed properly in the middle of the fight. He just does so kind of funnily. You can definitely make an argument for Mark being much faster than Light if you think he's in any way comparable to his father, who is able to travel vast solar distances in a pretty small amount of time relatively. On the low end, he's relativistic, with a significantly more generous and a bit of a highball interpretation, putting him massively faster than the speed of light, at least within the context of space travel. This just leaves us the matter of durability to attend to, and in order to scale this, you don't really have to do all that much digging. Mark gets his ass beat so often and so badly that the series just gives you a litany of instances to use. You want to know how durable he is? I mean, check any individual episode of Invincible. You're gonna see his durability be stress tested. In all honesty though, his resilience is probably just slightly above that of what we have for his strength, being around that small country level. We're able to determine this because he's not able to get one shot by other Viltrumites on or above his level of strength, and his fist doesn't immediately shatter upon making contact with his opponents. So these two stats should remain pretty relative, and I think this is consistent with Mark being able to get hit with specially made nukes and pretty much eating it to the face without taking on too much damage. But with that being said, Mark's abilities have been properly evaluated, and now it's time to see how the Jujutsu Kaisen universe stacks up against Invincible. When it comes to Jujutsu Kaisen and its scaling, I'm gonna save everyone some time and just say, if you are not a high tier, like able to outright beat special grade curse spirits or are a special grade curse yourself, don't even bother showing up today, gang, because you're not making the cut. They're just not gonna be relevant characters today. Just on the basis of physicality alone, low and even mid-tier JJK characters are going to be absolutely wiped off the face of the map by Mark Grayson, leaving us just with sorcerers and curses that are considered a cut above the rest. Oh, and before I forget, this is a video in which the entire premise rests solely on this versus battle being capable of happening. So, no, I'm not gonna say Mark can't see or damage cursed spirits, even though, strictly speaking about the power systems, universes, and how they would interact, that would be the case. I mean, he doesn't have curse energy. He wouldn't be able to exercise curses. But if we were going strictly on how these things would interact, he also wouldn't be showing up. So, pull the stick out, please and thank you, and try to enjoy the video. Thanks. When it comes to a top-tier JJK character strength, based on calculations of certain explosive or other destructive displays of power, they can range anywhere from large town to island level on the high end. Attacks like Jogo's Maximum Meteor, Sukuna's Fire Arrow in Shibuya, and Gojo causing a sizable earthquake just by showing up are just a few of the levels of power that higher tier Jujutsu Kaisen characters can pretty consistently scale to. Only the likes of Gojo and probably Sukuna would reach these island levels of strength consistently with their Jujutsu, as the feat that earned this output level comes from Gojo, and we know with a high level of certainty that no one else in the story besides Sukuna scales to him in raw stats. There are more charitable ways to scale JJK characters across the board, like estimating their maximum output ability based on the size of their creation within their domains. That's a pretty contentious way to go about scaling the verse, so today we'll keep it as simple as possible. What's a little bit more difficult to keep simple, unfortunately, is Jujutsu Kaisen's speed scaling. I mean, we can, but like, Gege does not exactly make it easy on us or anything. You see, every character worth their cursed energy in JJK has feats or directly scales to someone faster than sound. Like, that is a pretty safe baseline for all the characters we're talking about today. We have plenty of examples of characters pretty casually reacting to gunfire without trouble, and have even seen several different interactions and people react to or outright avoid piercing blood, which is capable of surpassing the speed of sound. Characters like Kenjaku and Sukuna show themselves to be significantly faster than this attack, so much so that in a nerfed Sukuna's case, he's been calced to be like 30 times faster than the speed of sound because of how crazily he blitzes Choso's ability here. We even have some better speed feats, although the validity and consistency of them can be called into question. For example, we see Akari avoid lightning in this particular instance, narrowly avoiding getting his head blown off by this bolt. But I've also seen pretty convincing, pretty valid arguments that this attack was never meant to be a kill shot in the first place, and thus was aimed at his arm the entire time, reducing the reaction and dodging feat to something that can't even really be scaled to Akari in the first place. And based on the angle of the drawing, I'm gonna be honest with you guys and say it's kind of hard to say for sure. It's something we'll kind of, hopefully, maybe get to know more about when the anime rolls around, but for the time being, it's just pretty up in the air. If Akari did dodge this attack though, plenty of characters in this story would be lightning timers. If not, being vaguely faster than sound is pretty much all a lot of high tiers in the verse have. Another example of a dubious speed feat is Sukuna dodging an attack that should be light speed in nature, as it's composed of electromagnetic waves. But the charge time required to fire off the blast shrouds the feat in doubt, as it's very possible Sukuna saw the equivalent of a ray gun pointed at his face and avoided the aim trajectory as it was charging. And the fact that he gets hit by not only a blast of sound, but also a bolt of electricity directly after this certainly doesn't help with the consistency aspect. Like, seriously, will high tiers like Gojo, Sukuna, Maki, kind of, and Kenjaku might scale above this pretty convincingly, as we have just better feats and calculations for that. Characters that should be somewhat relative to or below this level of travel and combat speed are kind of just handicapped to being that way, unless you argue it's entirely inconsistent, and like I said, it's kind of up in the air. So, to be frank, consistency lies with the best of the best JJK characters being faster than sound. Gojo and Sukuna maybe exist beyond that, and could possibly reach the realm of lightning timers if we're being considerate. Light speed Jujutsu Kaisen scaling is an inconsistent Hail Mary, and definitely something that I won't be asserting as the norm for the verse, is I myself just don't believe the foundation for that interpretation is there. Now, while the Jujutsu Kaisen universe may seem like it's in some pretty deep shit based on their physical stats, where their true strength lies is in the myriad of hacks and special abilities. Take someone like Gojo, for example, the poster boy of Jujutsu Kaisen crossverse scaling that is as effective as he is because of the combination of the Limitless and Six Eyes. Now, I've made videos covering the extent of Satoru's abilities in great detail in the past, so I won't be doing that here, but I'm sure y'all know the basics. Infinity stops, blue pulls, red repels, purple deletes, and infinite void overwhelms. Alongside Gojo, other characters in JJK have some pretty powerful curse techniques or domain expansion tricks that would allow them to deal with or straight up counter massive gaps in physical ability. Sukuna's world-cutting dismantle, Mahito's idol transfiguration, Mahoraga's adaptation, Higuruma's judgment and executioner's blade, and Nobara's resonance are just a few examples of this. I'll go much more in depth with how I think certain scenarios would play out once we get to the comparison portion of the video, and speaking of which, it's hard to do just that, with both Mark and the entirety of Jujutsu Kaisen's capabilities being laid out on the table. We can now discuss how this whole thing would play out. So when discussing a versus matchup like this, I'm going to split my analysis of the situation into two separate camps. One, where Mark fights in character, basically all of his hangups about holding back, and his general overconfidence in his strength will be in play here. And the second, where he is coming into this entirely bloodlusted, just like off a perk, Omni-Man type of energy, or how he felt when he was fighting Angstrom Levy. The reason I bother splitting these two versions of the character up into different scenarios is because, to be completely honest with you, the context of this fight and the outcome itself entirely changes based on the way that Mark comes into this. And to be blunt, if Mark fights the way that he usually does, he's going to get absolutely stomped out by the Jujutsu Kaisen universe, despite on a physical basis clearing all of them, even when you put all of their abilities together. At top speed, he'd pretty much be able to blitz any and every sorcerer and curse without issue, and his small country levels of attack power would be enough to one-shot anyone he could get his hands on. The tiny issue with that is that Mark kinda fights like an idiot, or rather, because of how much stronger he is than most threats in his own universe, won't prioritize avoiding every attack or finishing off foes as soon as possible, because why would he? He's invincible. This opening would allow for so many different techniques and strategies to work on him, unfortunately, and many of them are pretty much instant kill shots. For example, if Mahito pulled up on Mark and touched him with his palm once, the fight would pretty much be over, as Mark hasn't displayed any resistances to soul-based attacks, and as such would fall victim to the properties of Idol Transfiguration. The same thing is true for attempting to block or outright tank an attack from something like Soul Split Katana, a cursed tool that, as the name implies, bypasses durability on a physical level by cutting the soul of the target. In both examples of Mark losing, he would be able to avoid these attacks with no real problem, as he's faster than Mahito and anyone in the series who could possibly wield Soul Split. But Invincible is riddled with examples of Mark getting hit by characters or attacks he has no business being hit by, all because he doesn't enter a fight with a killer instinct, or he just doesn't expect much from his enemies. This fact only becomes more true if we allow domain expansions to work on him. Now, I need you to really look at me when I say this. I know that domain expansions, or at least most domain expansions, wouldn't work on Mark because he canonically does not have cursed energy. However, he also wouldn't be able to hurt cursors as a result of that. We're already past that point. We're past the point of no return. And it's a main part of the Jujutsu Kaisen power system. So I'm going to at least consider the possibility of domain expansions working on him. And you guys can take it or leave it if you like. Okay? Okay. Glad we're on the same page. Now, assuming domains can apply their sure hit ability, the number of attacks Mark could be overwhelmed by does increase by a pretty large number. Infinite Void, Deadly Sentencing, Self-Embodiment of Perfection, and even something like Chimera Shadow Garden all have precedent for working on and defeating Mark in some way. Infinite Void would just fry his brain and leave Mark completely defenseless. Mahito's domain just amplifies and extends the range of his curse technique. Deadly Sentencing could potentially remove Mark's power to give Higuruma an insta-kill option, and Chimera Shadow Garden could unironically send Mark to the Shadow Realm, something that we've seen kind of work on him before in his fight with Darkwing. If domains don't work, then the aforementioned attacking strategies are still on the table and viable for going up against a normal version of Mark. Even someone like Nobara, a character that is far from being considered the strongest in the series, has a curse technique that, in theory, would allow for her to dole out some serious damage. If anything of Mark's, like his hair or blood, is left in the wake of this battle with other characters, one use of Resonance would put Mark flat on his ass. His fighting style and tendency to be overconfident will trip him up in instances like this countless times against a universe that is so hacked out and so mentally sound like Jujutsu Kaisen's. But if he's, sipping that Omni-Man juice, then wow, Jujutsu Kaisen is largely cooked. Like, the entire situation changes. The difference in speed and power is so exaggerated in this particular matchup that pretty much every character is getting turned into blood vapor before they even recognize what's happening. The only two characters that I think have an argument for surviving Mark's faster than light mad dash through the verse are Mahito and Gojo due to their specific immunities to conventional damage. Gojo obviously has Infinity, and Mahito is immune to attacks that don't harm his soul. Now, you may be thinking that these two characters can clutch things up if they just pop their domains, since they also have some of the most lethal ones in the series anyway. And while, yeah, they could probably kill him if they landed them, at this point, it's kind of a big if. You see, due to the Viltrumite biological makeup I mentioned earlier, that super science-y sounding one, Mark might just be able to punch Gojo no problem, and the instant Mahito gives up the game about his ability, as he tends to do in all of his fights, Mark might just throw him into orbit and call it a day. The reason I say he might just be able to get past Infinity is because of the way Gojo discerns and filters danger. In Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0, we get the statement from Miguel on how precise the Limitless truly is, and we find out that Gojo is able to manipulate space on an atomic level. A very impressive feat to say the least, however, one that means that anything more granular than atoms, like say, subatomic particles like light or particles that all Viltrumites manipulate to move faster than light, wouldn't be registered as dangerous and therefore unaccounted for by his ability. So to simplify, Mark might be able to shift his actual subatomic particles in a way that Gojo can't register. Now, this isn't to say that it's 100% guarantee that Mark can just bypass the Limitless due to his DNA, but there is certainly a decent argument for it. And if that is the case, Bloodlusted Mark just tears through the Jujutsu Kaisen universe in a very similar fashion to Omni-Man and the Flaxons. So to summarize, if Mark comes into this fight with the idea of holding back still in his head, the unique abilities and mindset of Jujutsu Kaisen characters will be able to take advantage of that and defeat him. But if Mark throws all that to the wayside and decides to fight like a pure Viltrumite, I guess you could say he'd seem pretty If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more scaling videos like this, and look forward to next week's project, where I'll be seeing how Mark stacks up against My Hero Academia's strongest hero as an accompaniment for the finale of Invincible Season 3. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.